Okay, now join me in welcoming one of Hollywood's most recognizable environmental advocates, Rachelle Begley. Rachelle is a top Hollywood producer and actor and co-star of the hit series Living with Ed, where she and her husband, Ed Begley Jr., take us behind the scenes as they build their new Platinum LEED certified dream home. She also hosts the podcast Begley-esque. I said it right, I think. Rachelle has been a master at using her platform to inspire millions in sustainable living across the country and across the globe. So please join me in welcoming Rachelle Begley. Grab a mic.
Hi, everyone. Wasn't that amazing this morning? I'm inspired. Well, that's a little grandiose, but who I am, I will say, I'm a daughter of a conservative Republican from Atlanta, Georgia, who happened to have read a book called Silent Spring. That makes me cry. It's one of those days. I'm very moved by all this. And he named me after Rachel Carson, who I deem as the mother of the environmental movement. That was as far as it went. Until later, I'm an actress. I pursued acting. I went to New York, did all that, and never went to college. I do not have a degree. I don't have any authority in this area, other than in 1989, 90, I met a man named Ed Begley Jr., and I fell in love, and he is an environmentalist. He's an actor. He was on a show called St. Elsewhere, and he was funny and wacky, but he was a purist. He walked his talk. He did not drive a car. He rode his bicycle all over Los Angeles. The first time I ever saw him, I said, well, it's easy for you, Mr. Hollywood, to get around on these mountains, but I'm a mere mortal, and I need a car. Anyway, cut to, we get together. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be in his world, up until that point, my interests were women, children, poverty, feminism. That was it, and art. And but I started living in his world, and because I'm a woman and that's what we're told to do. But having said that, it paid off because I started to hear, and I was told on numerous occasions, without the environment, there is no feminism, there is no nothing. That is a fundamental right of every human being to have clean water, clean air, and have a planet that's sustainable. So anyway, cut to, we do our life, and I go to 100 million of these and get very educated. And then one day, it's in the early 2000s, 2006 or something, and it was very slow. It was during, we used to have this thing called pilot season in Hollywood, and pilot season is, before pilot season, it's very slow. It was January, and someone came to me and said, we want to do a show. Green was in. There was a moment that green was actually green, and it was in favor. And they said, HGTV wants to do a show about the environment, and they want to, would Ed and you be interested? And I said, well, listen, I'll do anything. I'm an actor. I'll do anything. He will never do it. And it was pilot season. It was before it. He wasn't working. So he said, come over, and, and we shot a pilot. And we shot really this little bitty, low-budget pilot about the way we live in this very small house in the San Fernando Valley. And they cut together 10 minutes, and it was funny. And so, hence, we did 3 years of a show called Living with Ed. And in the 2 years we were on Home and Garden, we got to talk about solutions. And we were, people from Iowa and red states, and we're, I don't believe in your politics, but I like that, rain barrel you had. How do I get one of those? That kind of thing. So we were having fun. We were using our art, our creativity, and we were talking about something that we believed in. Cut to, that show went on to a network called Planet Green, which was great. We were all so excited. That went the way of the dodo, in that they decided that green was expensive, and no one cared. So that network became barbecue shows. Texas, by the way. So having said that, since then, I have subsequently tried to dedicate my life, I'm an actor, so I do act, but to getting more programming, because I felt and experienced the impact that programming had on communicating very simple solutions. And if we get them in, we got them in with comedy, but we get them in with very a rain barrel at that point. Anyway, cut to we outgrew our house. We have this beautiful daughter here who you will hear from. And I was sharing a bathroom. We were all sharing a bath and a half, and that was just not going to work. So I needed to move, and my husband would not even hear anything, but we had to build a LEED Platinum house. So, and if you know what certification of a LEED Platinum is, it's hard. But we did it. So now we have this big, beautiful house that is sustainable. I have rainwater catchment. I have a 10,000-gallon rain barrel, not barrel. It's literally a huge submarine buried in my backyard. And it's solar. We have battery backup. So if, and many times during a lot of problems in LA, we have run out of power. We have lights, all of those things. Cut to, I'm here. I'm trying. I've done web shows. I've done. I'm so unbelievably nervous. I don't know why. Can I have some water? I asked for what I need, and that is it. I'm not crazy about the plastic, but I'll live.
We won't tell Ed.
Yeah, I don't care. And I don't really, because that's so much better. I don't know why I would be nervous. Other than, I'm a person. I'm just a person. I have no degree. I have no nothing other than a passion. And I am committed to that passion. And I tell you, I have said no more. I am not, oh, my poor daughter. I'm like, Hayden, I got an idea. She goes, what? Another reality show? No, I don't want to hear about it. I have created so many and gone, up recently to the networks. And the networks were like, oh, interesting. You guys are fun. Okay, no. And then we had an election, and that sort of put the kibosh on that. I'm dedicated to this because it just gets more people in the tent, and as you noticed, putting that carbon, I don't know a lot about carbon, but that was interesting. If it's interesting, if it's funny, if it's compelling, if something in it. I come to the environmental movement now more from a health and wellness perspective. My husband is more about energy, but we all play our part. And so at the end of the day, I think I've done my duty here in explaining who I am and why I'm here. So that's it.
Fabulous. You are always well. Yes, have a seat. Thank you, Rachelle. You're fabulous. Okay, now the famous daughter, Hayden Begley. Come on, join us. Rachelle and Hayden's daughter is a musician, songwriter, climate activist, and social media phenom, by the way. But she uses her massive social media influence really creatively, including to highlight climate change and sustainable living. And she'll tell you some fun stories. Come, have a seat. Ina Modja is a UN Goodwill ambassador specifically for the UN Convention to Combat Climate Desertification. I'll get that right one day. Ina is using her creativity to change the narrative on climate change, including through her groundbreaking work called the Great Green Wall Project. Have a seat, my dear, which is in over 20 countries across Africa to address desertification. I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about that. She also has an adorable little daughter who unfortunately is not here. Chelsea Henderson is Director of Editorial Content at republicn.org, a nonprofit organization that calls themselves, quote, Conservatives for Climate Change, close quote. She's also the author of an insightful best-selling book called Glacial, The Inside Story of Climate Politics. Boy, do we need that. And is that a timely publication date? Have a seat, Ms. Chelsea. I had Chelsea on my show, and more to come on that, by the way. But you can buy Chelsea's book at the EarthX store downstairs, and if you're smart, you'll have her sign it while she's here. How's that? Okay? Cool. Welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining me. Okay. Rachelle, what's intriguing to me, I love what you said about if it's interesting and compelling, then people pay attention. But that's what you've been doing through a range of your content. So how can you teach us what's working? I mean, I love that you said the person came up to you and basically said, or emailed you, whatever, and said, I don't agree with your politics, but I love the rainwater thing. Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about, right? It's like, I don't agree with your politics, but I think that's a cool car, kind of thing, right? So how do we do more of that? What do you find is working? What can we learn from the way Hollywood works with other communication to take into this work?
Well, I think authenticity. So Hollywood, we have, good or bad, we are the trendsetters of the planet. It is what it is, I know. And now the Kardashians have set that trend. But not everyone is a Kardashian. And even them, if they would come out for the environment, I think we would have, it would be interesting. And I hope they do, and I'm sure they have. So, far be it for me to know. But there are a lot of people that do speak out and have courage, because it's not always the most popular thing. Ruffalo, Mark Ruffalo, my friend Bryan Cranston, really top, wonderful artists. They put their money where their mouth is. They talk about what they believe in. How can we do that? I think courage. Just have to keep at it and say what you believe, no matter where the chips may fall. And my husband always thought that, by being such an environmentalist in the early the 80s and 90s, that it might have cost him jobs, and it may have. But he also, his life purpose may be this environmental message. We don't know, It's courage.
And I love that, courage and authenticity. We can learn more of that, all of us. Ina, different parts of the U.S. are like different countries in many ways, but you've managed to cross the boundaries of cultures. And that's what we need to do. I mean, I feel like the United States is a whole bunch of different countries, frankly. So how have you been successful in bridging cultures with your message that maybe we can take into the United States also to bridge the political and cultural cultures here?
I think people care about human stories. I think that, first of all, no matter where you are from, your story other people can relate to it. They can relate to your resilience. They can relate to the environment where you live, and they can relate to, losing a lot of things, no matter what. And so for me, as an artist, a musician, and filmmaker, I use my art to tell these human stories. And the Great Green Wall Initiative was created by the African Union, and it started with 13 countries, but now there are more than 20, supporting the initiative. And so for me, to make the Great Green Wall Initiative become global, we decided to make a film. And so in this film, I traveled from Senegal to Ethiopia, or all across the Sahel. The Sahel is the southern region of the Sahara Desert. So all across the width of Africa, we traveled. And the idea was to show people, and not only an initiative that aims to restore 100 million hectares of degraded lands and pushing back the Sahara Desert, because people sometimes don't care about nature. Sometimes don't care about land degradation. They don't care about climate change, but seeing how it impacts people, seeing how people are resilient, how they are migrating because of desertification, climate change, how when you tie all of the different things, conflict in the Sahel, lack of education, because when you cannot stay in a place and you're forced to move all the time, how are you going to educate your kids? Also, gender equality is something that doesn't happen in some of these regions, because women and girls are the most vulnerable during crisis, and climate change is one of the biggest one. And so how everything is interconnected, and put that all in a film. It's by telling the stories of people and seeing different perspectives, and also forced migration. And I live between Mali. I'm an indigenous Fulani woman from the desert of Mali, and now I live also in Europe. When we had the crisis with a lot of refugees going through, onboarding ships, going through the Mediterranean Sea and coming to Europe, a lot of people were not aware of the reasons why. they just thought that people just showed up because Europe is seen as the El Dorado. So for me, it was important to put that in a film, the why, so that people could understand, have more compassion, and relate. They are climate refugees. They come from, majority of them come from the Sahel, or regions where they cannot make a living. 80% of rural areas in the Sahel live from some form or another of agriculture. And when you cannot practice that because the land is so degraded, and the land is so degraded because of climate change, knowing that Africa is the continent that least contribute to climate change because of industrialization, you try to understand, well, we are all participating in climate change, but some people who are less contributing to that climate change are forced to migrate. And to understand, instead of just saying, these migrants, we don't want them here taking our jobs, or scary stories and stuff, we humanize them. They are fleeing climate change. The Sahel is so hot in some places. I come from the desert. I don't know if you know Timbuktu, and in English is Timbuktu. There's this phrase that says that it's the end of the world. It's the furthest place on earth. That's where I come from. And I'm here, so it's not that far. But people from these regions are fleeing because the temperatures are so high that it becomes almost impossible to survive. And as human beings, we have been migrating for such a long time. So understanding that these are climate refugees, it creates an impact on people who were clueless on why they were coming. So it impacts us, and so what can we do? So this is, I'm being long here, but this is how in films and storytelling and music or whatever form of art you use to tell the stories of humans, you can create a bridge between people instead of a divide. You can create empathy and understanding and people starting to take action, because shame doesn't work. It has been tried, it doesn't work. And to finish with what I was saying is how I was in Brazil last year in June. I spent time traveling with Marina Silva and Celia Chacriaba, and we went to the northern part of Brazil, in Caatinga. It looked like the Sahel, and the people there were struggling with the same things that we struggle in the Sahel. So, and their stories are very similar. So the solutions are common. And how do you make sure that we tackle these issues globally together? Because it doesn't matter where you come from, there's a big chance that somebody else on the other side of the globe is struggling with the same things. So the oneness of this remind people that we have one planet and each one of us have a duty to do something. And how do you learn how to do something? It's by willing to learn more. It's by willing to do more. And this happens often when you are facing a human story.
I
Thank
love
you.
that. I think she wins the award for having come the furthest distance to be here, don't you? Thank you, Ina, and we'll dive a little bit more into that. But I want to, Chelsea, I want to come to you because when you talk about, when Ina talks about, and I mentioned building a bridge, you're in a really interesting place right now. You come from a history of understanding the complicated dynamics of passing climate legislation in the United States across aisles, right? I mean, you can't do it with just one set of people. And now you're at an organization that calls themselves Conservatives for Climate Change. By the way, I also, as I said, I interviewed her on my show. You can hear a lot more about it in her book on my show. But tell us what's working, what's reaching these people. Is it is it a focus on solutions? Is it a focus on the human stories? Is it a focus on the economic benefit, like the economic opportunities? How is Republican finding it's successful to reach people who are otherwise stuck in their political silos and ideological silos? Because as I said in the beginning, and we've said it, repeatedly today, Mother Nature doesn't give a bleep what your political party is when she's about to wipe out your house with a hurricane.
Absolutely. So Republican.org was founded by former Congressman Bob Inglis, who kind of famously in 2010 lost his reelection because he had the audacity to admit that climate change was real, and then he's a conservative Republican from a very conservative district in South Carolina, and then he further went on and introduced a carbon tax bill. So, the T word is a very bad word in Washington. And he was primaried and lost the primary. He'd won his previous election by 80%, and then he lost the primary by about the same amount. So the voters of South Carolina were like, no, thank you. So a lot of politicians would backpedal, right? And say, oh, no, that the polls are wrong, or the polls are saying I have to go in this other direction. Bob doubled down and said he wanted to create a community where people who are right of center could feel emboldened to have conversations, or they could come to the table to learn, or they could talk about different solutions other than the ones that are already at the table, but that you have to get to the table. And so I think taking a step like that to just create a community can take a lot of courage. We talked a lot about courage, but it's even harder now. It got a lot harder 100 days ago. And I will tell you, Bob is very much a never Trumper. My little secret that I like to tell is I've worked for 4 Republican senators, and I'm not a Republican. They never asked, right? I was working on environmental issues, and those were the days, like in the late 90s and the early 2000s, when the environment was much more bipartisan. And so no one ever asked my political affiliation. I could just go in and work in these offices, and we'd strike compromises and pass bills. And so I kind of come with that bipartisan lens. Bob has his let's make a space for everybody lens. But Joan, everything you said is true. When you're talking about climate change, and Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who was in that carbon video, she says the most important thing that we can do is talk about it, but you have to find how you're going to connect with the person. So is it somebody who's had to flee their home because of a hurricane? Maybe it's somebody who wants to buy a home in Florida and they can't afford to because the insurance rates are so high now. And homeownership is like the fundamental tenet of the American dream, right? And if you can't even fulfill the American dream, mass immigration, we have it's such a hot topic in this country. And right now, immigrants who are legally here are being rounded up and deported. So think about people needing to flee their countries and trying to come here. Any politician in this country who cares about immigration should care about climate change. So it's an economic issue, it's a public health issue, it's a transportation issue. So an earlier panel today was talking about we shouldn't silo ourselves. I think any policy framework that we're looking at, agriculture, healthcare, has to have a climate change lens. And that's how we reach people. And it's also through the storytelling. So what can you connect with a person on? And then figure out what the climate connection is to that. But I will tell you, number one thing, do not come at people who say they are skeptical about climate change with science and statistics, because there's no sure way to shut down a conversation. Find the way to connect to them.
I would be in deep trouble.
Hey, I do it too. I got in a bar fight in Alexandria
all the time, but I'm a journalist, so yeah, absolutely. No, that's so insightful. Just to kind of follow on that, and then I want to bring Hayden in. But is it low? I mean, you have to find out what their Achilles heel is first, right? You have to find out if they're in Asheville, North Carolina, like my friend Jennifer, who you'll meet in a bit, is. Or they're from LA where the fires are. I mean, you have to find out what their story is to know that intersection.
Well, I have actually a really interesting little anecdote. We have a member of our community who is a pastor in Kansas City, I believe, somewhere in the Midwest. And he is very, very much believes in climate change and the need for the federal government to help solve it. And he has a congregation. So he and his brother and sister actually asked me to zoom in on their little book club because they had read my book, Glacial. And while I was in this little book club, he said, I cannot say the words climate change in a sermon. I cannot talk to my congregation about climate change. I will lose people and then I will get fired, basically. But he drives a Tesla. He has a battery storage in his house, and he has solar. So he said what he does is he talks about how he has no energy bill. He doesn't pay for gas. And when people are like, oh, why did you, this was back when having a Tesla was a hippie car. Now I think it's like flipped the other direction. There was some vandalism in DC recently against Tesla
Across
drivers.
the country. Yeah.
But he said that he'll invite them for a ride. Like, come on, check this car out. Isn't this cool? Look at this tech. Look what it does. And so he never says the word climate change, but he's trying to get people to be more open and acceptable to some of the green things that you're doing in your home and stuff, just to, when you see those, how cool it is or how cutting edge it is, that can be something that can bring someone over. So I think it is really, you have to be inquisitive and you have to be open-minded and you have to listen.
I think that's a mantra for our lives, right? You have to be open-minded, inquisitive, and listen. Hayden, you've been magical in leveraging social media. But, with just to full disclosure, she has like 450,000 followers on social media. So when I say magical, I'm not kidding. I'm sure that some of those people that follow you, let's put it this way, I'm sure all of those people are not progressive Democrats. Let's put it that way.
That is very accurate. I would say a lot of people follow me because they recognize my family from different movies and TV shows, and they are across the country. So
how are you reaching them? She's got some really fun stories of creative things that she's filmed and put over there. But what are you finding? Because you are building a bridge. All of you guys are physically doing it today. That's why I wanted to bring you in to talk about it, because you got to teach the rest of us. We have to, the people in this room and at this conference, and anybody that we know who shares our belief in addressing the urgency of climate change need to be a bridge and build a bridge. And you're doing it on an incredible scale. So how are you, what's working? How are you doing this?
Well, I had the most incredible teacher, which is my dad, who I cannot say enough kind things about. He's not only my dad, but he's also my best friend and my hero. And he's not here to even hear me say that, so I'm not trying to butter him up.
I'll tell him.
Yes, but you have about 100 witnesses. So
yes. He, at a very early on in his activism, he's just a kind person. He's an empathetic person. He's someone who truly cares about people, regardless if they agree with him or care about him in return. And he very early on in his activism realized that he wanted to, like you said, find the similarities. And part of his talking points when he would go to primarily red states and discuss the environmental movement was saying that his biggest influence when it came to his environmentalism came from his conservative father, who was all about turning off the lights when you weren't in that room, turning off, reusing tinfoil when you could. And how the principles of conservation are a conservative principle. And he made he made waves with that. He got a lot of people, we still to this day, when we go out together, people will come up to him and say, I'm a card-carrying Republican and I don't agree with most of what you say, but you are completely behind what you say. You live what you say you do. You practice what you preach. And he really has. He did not buy gas through the decade known as the 90s. He did not buy gas. He had an electric car and he had a natural gas car, so that was separate, but that was only for emergencies. And he was like, no, this is how I'm going to live my life because this is what I say is the right thing to do. And so his moral backbone and his character is something that I witnessed at a very early age and thought he is not only admired by people who disagree with him, but he is also somebody who gets to go to bed at night and know that he lives a life to which he finds to be, the ultimate representation of what he believes. And so seeing that and seeing the bridges that he built with people who do not vote the way he does, I tried to adopt that. I just tried to kind of replicate what he has done. And I actually, to this day, have a lot of conservative friends. who I am kind of their token left-leaning hippie, who I can come to. They'll bring about some polarizing news article to me and say, "What are your thoughts on this?" And I'll give an alternative perspective. And what I've done specifically with social media is kind of, it's a generational thing. Our attention spans are getting shorter, especially with my generation. You have to capture someone's attention within the first 3 seconds of them watching your video before they scroll past. So I knew that going in, and once I first began posting just as a way to document my life. I think for the first year of having TikTok, didn't even post anything and had like 3 followers, and they were all my friends. But then I began posting things about my life, and I started to see what worked and what didn't. And back in 2023, I thought, it would be a great idea is if I did a series on TikTok where I take public transportation in LA, which if you are from LA or know about LA, nobody does that unless you need to. It is very underfunded, and it is something that we desperately need. Public transportation cuts your carbon footprint by 40%. We can't expand the freeways anymore in Los Angeles. Not even a climate issue, just an infrastructure issue. The average LA resident spends 2 years of their life sitting in traffic. So we need to do something for a number of reasons, and I wanted to show my support for public transit, which is something my dad has done his whole life. So I started a series on TikTok that I knew I had to capture people's attention in the first 3 seconds, and so I had an opening of me and my dad and me turning over my keys for a week to him, and it got people's attention. So by the time the 7th day rolled around, which was my finale, where I took it to the Oscars, I had people tuning in to see where I was going to go and what I was going to do next. And I was very truthful about the drawbacks of, our infrastructure and, how hard it was to get around. But that just highlighted the need for more funding and further progress. So I would say the biggest thing that I've advanced on in the last couple of years has been finding a way to get someone's attention. Kind of like what you said, the statistics don't always get people. And you could throw a bunch of stats at people, but there's alternative facts.
I would also love to just touch on something you just said about you have friends who are conservative, because last week I spoke at a conference on depolarization, and we can't depolarize if we just sit in our own echo chambers. And so the fact that you can have friends and listen to them and have that discourse, there's going to be a friend who's going to say, wow, you know what, I'm really am impressed the way that you're walking the talk, and you might influence them and they might influence you on an issue. But I think we have to have those relationships in our lives.
Totally. I mean, I just came from a few days ago, my lovely boyfriend and his family, who are very different. He grew up on a ranch in South Texas, Tilden, and if anyone knows where that is, there is an intersection. He calls it a one-horse town. Apparently that's a saying. And it was quite magical being on the ranch with people who work with horses and who have documented the fact that each summer the summers are getting hotter, right? It's something that they're seeing firsthand, and that's changing how they have to care for their horses on this ranch. And they do not vote like I do, and they would probably be on paper quite opposite to the way I've lived my life, but we can, build bridges.
And one thing I will add to her experiment on TikTok is it led to a whole year working for the head of the Metropolitan Transit Authority in Los Angeles. So it gave her a job, and I was very happy. Yeah, thank you.
In case you missed this, Hayden, I think, and your dad, right, took the subway to the Oscars. Okay. I think Rachelle actually took a car, which was I sympathize with. But when you're dressed to the teeth to take the subway, and by the way, full disclosure, I helped launch part of the LA Metro line, so I feel like it's my subway. But Rachelle, I want to stay with you because you've seen. You've been working in this, and it's interesting because you've been bridging this gap between Hollywood and the environmental message. So how have you had to, or have you chosen to adapt your message or your strategy to reach people like they're talking about that don't, and you kind of touched on, that don't agree with your politics? Has it been something deliberate, or does it just happen, or how have you, or have you not adapted? How have you addressed that?
You have to adapt. Look at Norman Lear. All in the Family. I mean, how impactful was that show? It just was art. And he, if you want to send a message, we used to say go to Western Union, not anymore. But comedy is a strong suit in my household. Comedy is how we live every day. Otherwise, we would have probably killed each other because we are intense people. And but at the end of the day, so that's how we get people. Telling a story has got to be entertainment. It's infotainment, and if it's not entertaining, people. There's a million documentaries, and there should be a million documentaries, and we need them. But it's not necessarily the crossover because it's like preaching to the choir. How do we get them in the tent to even hear the story? So that has been it's hard. But with Living with Ed and with subsequent things that I've done have been a little more successful, mainly because we were a family they could identify with. They could identify with screaming and yelling at each other. But at the end of the day, we loved each other and we were funny. And there was funny. But we're talking about real issues. I don't want to do, I always had to play sort of the character that, like, do I really have to do that? I mean, really? I have to take the subway, that kind of thing.
But you represented the average person's perspective.
I represented myself. I really believe, I definitely bitched about it, but I did it. That's the difference. I complain, but at the end of the day, what do we, it's like turn down the sound and watch the picture. I did it. But there is the funny in that. There's the conflict. That is what storytelling is. It's certainly on TV and film and narrative. It is. There has to be conflict, and that I provided that.
We also can't expect everyone to do all the things. So you might want to take the subway, and you might not. But you might want to be vegan, and you might not.
Right.
And when we start judging what people do as their individual choices, I think we are all trying to do our best.
Right.
And this morning we had that poll that everyone in the room said business was not doing enough to solve climate change. And that really struck me because it is a problem of corporate pollution and pollution beyond what my making a change in my life is going to fix. I remember during the pandemic, I have since left the platform now known as X, but seeing a tweet that said something like, oh, the Belgian airlines flew 300 empty flights today, early pandemic, right? Because they wanted to save their berth at these European airports. And the person had reposted it and said, glad I recycled that tomato can yesterday. And that just, I still remember this 5 years later, right? Because that's sometimes how I feel. I drive a 15-year-old Prius. I take the metro when I can. I have been vegan before. I got solar panels. I try to do my things, but it is not enough. Our individual actions are great, and we should do them because that does put pressure on corporate interests, but we have to demand that there is some reduction in carbon emissions. That's the only way we're going to solve this.
Hit the streets like we've been doing.
Although the collective action does matter. By the way, interesting point of fact, I interviewed this great woman, Emily O'Brien, who started a company called Earth Angel, where she's reducing the carbon footprint of television and film productions. So think about, they blow up these buildings, they blow up cars, right? They're using cars to transport people to and from sets all the time. And it's not just catering and plastic bottles. So she goes in with her team to reduce the carbon footprint of the actual production, which is pretty cool, right? Ina, talk about the strategies. You touched upon the Great Green Wall. So talk a little bit more about actually what that is. But also, how have you found, what communication, messaging, strategies, techniques, verbiage, however you want to put it, have you found successful in actually building broad support for such an innovative project, especially in a part of the world that is probably more survival focused than on who gives a bleep about climate change, right? Even though they may be migrating because of climate change, but they might not frame it that way in their heads.
So the Great Green Wall Initiative is an initiative that has been created by the African Union. It started with 13 countries, but like I was saying before, now there are much more countries who are not in the Sahel. The idea, it aims to restore 100 million hectares of land in the southern region of the Sahara Desert, so all across the width of Africa, from Senegal to Djibouti. And the idea is not only restoring the land, it's also restoring communities that are living in this part of the Sahel by, creating an environment where they can have economic opportunities. For example, when planting trees, it's not only about planting trees, it's about what type of trees do you plant. It can be fruit, shade trees that will provide shade to be an economical partner with cosmetic brands. It can be also through acacia trees, Arabic gum, which we need to create sodas, and lots of different things like a superfood like baobab and things like that. And it's also by giving opportunities to this region to keep people there by bringing not only jobs, but also an environment where they can stay and live. And so by restoring the land, you create, a greener area, you create job opportunities, you create a community that is not only in survival mode, but building something. And so for this Great Green Wall, when I joined the initiative with UNCCD in 2017, it was an initiative that nobody was really talking about. And the idea was, how are we going to make this a global thing? And so the campaign, the film was part of the campaign, but there was a lot of also bringing political will, raising funds, and I'm very happy to share that the campaign helped raise $20 billion.
Wow.
For the initiative.
Okay, that deserves applause.
And so, thank you. And so for me, going to the UN headquarters in New York and sharing about the stories of people, their resilience, everything, storytelling touches also the leadership. And so I I was a speaker at the UN Security Council in 2020 to share about my journey in this. So it's important to have voices of people who are not also political.
Right.
I just came back from Uzbekistan, where I was filming the Aral Sea, which is waterless. Like from the 1960s to now, it has shrunk more than 90%. Oof. And I was picking up shells in the sand that looked like the Sahara Desert. And you could see like these boats, they call it the boat cemetery. And visually, it's something that is striking. I knew about it, but my first time being there, I was so shocked. It really shaked something in my core. And so doing a film and sharing all of these parts hopefully will help not only with day-to-day people like us, but also the political leaders and working on policies as well. So you have to be 360. You have to be like a Swiss knife to
go there, and tell stories. So we'll have a little bit of time for questions, so prepare your questions. Chelsea, I don't want to leave this moment without getting some instruction from you, frankly, because about 20 Republican lawmakers, we know, let's back up, we know that the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill have been very instrumental in giving a boost to addressing climate change and growing a clean, green economy. They are at risk in the new administration. But about 20 different Republican congressmen sent a letter to Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and said, basically, hands off our tax credits and funding because we like the jobs it's creating and the economic growth it's creating. I'm sure Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, doesn't want to lose his burgeoning battery sector now and EV sector. So what can we do in this room and through our networks to reach people in political positions to say, keep protecting us from climate change, keep building climate resilience, please keep seizing the economic opportunities from addressing these challenges and providing these solutions? What can we do to pressure the lawmakers? Because that's what they listen to. Just as an example, when the Affordable Care Act was under threat under the first Trump administration, thousands of people showed up at lawmakers' offices and said, hands off my health care insurance. And they stopped. So it matters.
It does matter. And as a former member of Congress, Bob always says that if you have 100 constituents reach out to you, whether it's over email or phone call or through social media probably even, then that is something that gets the members' attention. So I would say I have two suggestions for you. One is, regardless of whether it's the local level, state level, political or federal level, write to your lawmakers, even if you're just saying, hey, thanks. So
thank them when they do the right thing.
Right. Thank them when I live in Maryland, and so my senators are both Democrats, but every morning I wake up, I have some coffee, I check the status of the coup, and then I call my senators, and I'm like, hey, thanks for that thing you said on the floor this week, or thanks for signing on to this letter, just because, and I call when I know no one's going to answer because they're so busy, but I want them to know that I appreciate their efforts and I don't just take it for granted. If you are represented by a Republican and they haven't been aligned with you on an issue, encourage them. Talk about the jobs numbers. Texas, we are in Texas. It is the #1 wind producing state in the country. It is the #2 solar producing state in the country. So those tax credits have helped Texans get jobs. The amount of tax revenue to the local economies, it helps with communities, it helps with schools, it helps with roads, it helps with so many things. So expressing that, and then my other little tricky thing that I always tell people to do is write an op-ed. Any newspaper, and especially the smaller ones. I mean, it's hard to get in the New York Times or the Washington Post, but you don't want that. Whatever your local paper is, they will have op-ed submissions on their website. It's usually 400 to 600 words. Write something that's really personal, and be sure to include the lawmaker's name you are targeting. It will make their daily clips, because there's some person in every lawmaker's office who assembles every media mention for their boss, puts them in a package, and so that lawmaker will see that you wrote something, and it will stick with them.
I love that. And don't worry if you're not a great writer. Write it anyway, because it's coming from your heart.
Or email me and I'll help you.
Yeah, well, there you go. See? Seriously. Like, how's that for delivery? Okay, who's got one or two questions? Phoebe, go ahead. I bypassed you before, so I'll... Yeah. Lindsay is chasing you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Just a bit of background context, because I feel that this session has been one of the most important that I have been to for a long time, because we are women, and this is what we do. We depolarize, we create cultural bridges, political bridges, and this is where we need to stand up, all of us, men and women and everybody else in between. I'm Phoebe Barnard, and I am a climate scientist and a biodiversity scientist, and I've been working on those things for 45 years now. So I've been in this game, and I've been one of those people who's spoken facts too much. But I am also now a filmmaker, and so last night, for example, we and EarthX, our co-producers, launched 4 documentary films, The Climate Restorers, very much on this topic. So I hugely appreciate both the documentary clip that was shown and the work of Ina.
Do you have a question? Or
I
are you
do.
just telling us about
I do. I would like to know how you feel that we can become more bold, more ambitious, more visible in the work that we do over the next 2 years, because in my work writing about emergencies, and I have a long history there of climate emergencies, I know that that's the time that we have, so we do not have time to waste.
I want to address this, and then you can talk to it. Yes, what I was going to say is TikTok. I mean, what a phenomenon. We still have it. So while we have it, we should use it. And people of all ages are getting followers, especially if you dance. Do you dance? No, I'm kidding. But if you can do that, if you can just get them in the tent, and you want to talk to it?
I think something that we've spoken a lot about is storytelling, talking about exactly what you just said, identifying yourself and your history and your expertise in this, and then draw it to something that everyone either knows about or wants to learn about. If there's some specific emerging issue that not many people are talking about, but you think would be, really impactful to X amount of people, talk about how many people are going to be impacted.
I got to have one more thing.
Okay, that's fine.
7 friends of mine including my sister, in the last 2 years have gotten breast cancer. Health is a big one. Now, certainly for women, but I think for men too, right? All the illness that is happening with neurological issues. No question is it due to, exposure
Endocrine
to
disrupting chemicals.
So all of that.
Yeah.
But we all care about health. At least I think we do. So that's another entry. But if you can do it cleverly or just whatever, just do it. Don't just stand there. Just do something.
So do something.
I'm also going to say, because you're a climate scientist, you can cite stats at people because you have the credibility.
Up to a point. Okay. So we're out of time, but Tracy is jumping out of her chair to ask something. So, Lindsay, there's somebody can you hand her a mic? Thanks.
Just real quickly, first, the Begleys. Alexandra Paul is a friend of mine, and she says hi. I just texted her. I think the simplest thing we can do, if we think back on how we got smoking to change, we just infused it in every television show. They had people not smoke. They had people talk about not smoking. Nothing hitting everybody over the head. I love science, but people aren't listening to science right now. They listen to entertainment. So do you have ideas on how we can infuse it in every television show? Just show someone recycling, show someone that oceans are right. I don't know how you do it, but it's simple. It's not rocket science.
Right, that's what I was talking about with having she's a rocket scientist, just in case you weren't here earlier. But yeah, that's what I was talking about in terms of the electric vehicle on a date, right? Norman Lear did it with racial attitudes. Will and Grace did it with gay love, etc. So yeah, encourage the TV networks to do that. We have to move on to the next session, which is where you get to share your input, right? So hold that thought. Tracy, you're absolutely right, and we can all do it by what we choose to watch, frankly, because they look at the ratings, she says as a TV producer. They do look at the ratings, and they look at who is watching. And all of us in this room are target markets for them. Okay? Thank you. Please join me in thanking the Begleys and Ina and Chelsea. And go buy Chelsea's book and have her sign it.